On the back of that release roadmap from Warhammer 3 and all the content planned over the next year or so, I wanted to strike while the iron was hot and go further in depth on my expectations for Shadows of Change and Thrones of Decay. The last video was pretty surface level, given how much material and time there was to cover everything, but for this one, we're going to be looking specifically at the Tzeentch, Kislev, and Cathay Lord Pack, delving deeper into lore and game mechanics and laying out a logical argument for everything that should be included. Not to mention, there was additional information released by Creative Assembly, alongside some very specific hints that should help narrow things down even further. So, coming later this summer, my guess is late July to mid-August, 3 legendary lords, a new legendary hero, and a bunch of new units will make landfall for Tzeentch, Cathay, and Kislev. They'll be accompanied by an additional free LC hero, race updates for all 3 factions, AI behavior updates on the campaign map, and settlement battle improvements as well, which hopefully means overhauls to siege mechanics and stuff to make them a little bit more entertaining. To get things kicked off, I want to start on the Tzeentch and Cathay rivalry, because right from day one, when the Far East was first announced, this was the seed that was planted by CA. Even before Cathay became playable, the politicking, infiltration, and exploitation of the cults of Qianqi throughout the Celestial Riverlands was a poorly kept secret. The influence of chaos, particularly of the Changer, has been inextricably linked to their kingdom since its inception, and of course that was brought to a head when Cathay was announced as an order race in Warhammer 3, and Kairos Fateweaver and his demonic hordes were their main rival in that trailer. Unfortunately, a lot of the lore surrounding this has come from secondhand sources, so many of y'all probably missed it, and I think that's why there's a good deal of misconceptions flying around, because you can't necessarily go to the Warhammer wiki and just read up about it, owing to the fact that Andy Hall, the lead writer for Game 3, kind of just dropped lore blurbs and sporadic interviews over the last couple of years, but I'll do my best to conglomerate all that here and explain why I believe Shadows of Change will focus on certain characters and how that ties back into the lore. Number 1, I believe this DLC will feature the Changeling as the Herald of Tzeentch, the Monkey King as the rep for Cathay, Mother Ostankya the Crone as the Lord Choice for Kislev, and Echoed Hellbrass as the free LC character. Already, you can see a theme developing here, a magical, more fantastical outlook of outcasts and tricksters that will bring wildly diverse playstyles and previously unexplored elements of their respective unit rosters to the fore. First, let's talk about the Monkey King. So, in the year 1999 of the Imperial calendar, the Dragon Emperor and the Moon Empress disappeared for 400 odd years. They straight up left, telling no one where they were going, telling no one what they were doing. I believe that is still completely in the dark, in the shadows. We don't know where they went or what was going on that front. All we know is this period became known as a time of darkness and disharmony, when the dragon siblings fell to infighting and civil war threatened to consume the kingdom. So during this time, the Monkey King invaded from his traditional stomping grounds in the Mountains of Heaven and rampaged throughout Li Dao's provinces in the south, before moving upwards into the north and taking the celestial city of Wei Jin and installing himself Emperor of Cathay. Now, the Monkey King is not explicitly mentioned as an evildoer, but he is known for the havoc and carnage he can cause on a whim, and obviously was big enough of a threat that he carved all the way into the heart of a massive empire and installed himself as boss. But while all the Dragon Kids hate him, they also hated each other during this time, and they may not have united to overthrow the Pretender, if not for the fact that the Monkey King promoted a Clan Eshin advisor named Kashyyyk to his court. For obvious reasons, the Dragons were pretty unhappy with having Skaven dictate legislation and policy, so they ultimately united around the same year their parents came back in 2380 and kicked the monkeys back to their mountain homeland. Now, the monkey people live in these Mountains of Heaven in the south, a gigantic mountain range that separates Cathay from Ind, and they are the second most populous race in Cathay behind humans, often being recruited and called upon to defend the homeland when chaos comes knocking. So, in many ways, they are a sub-faction within Cathay itself, with occasionally separate goals and ideals, sure, but still ultimately tied to the kingdom at large. In addition, there is a very peculiar description of the Monkey King that might start those alarm bells ringing, and I quote, "Local legends of the Monkey King vary wildly. In northern Cathay, he is said to be a raging gorilla that bellows for blood. In the west, a baboon-like creature with golden hair and an engorged rear, for the Monkey King is always in heat. On the eastern coast, legends tell of a gluttonous orangutan with an exposed belly covered with unsightly boils, and in some parts of the Cathayan south, the Monkey King is said to be a slight spider monkey who jumps upon the shoulders of allies and enemies, whispering half-truths and lies." If you notice, the entire damn ruinous pantheon is present in those depictions, from a cornate gorilla to a horny Slaneshi baboon. You might wonder then, why a lord who kicked off a civil war against Cathay, and who sounds like an avatar of chaos, would be their first DLC. Well, there are a couple very good reasons. Number one, everything Andy Hall has told us about him thus far is that he's been the target of a smear campaign, posters of putrid propaganda, if you will. Multiple interviews from him, Andy has hinted heavily at Tzeentch purposely painting a target on the Monkey King's back, sowing discord in Cathay, and trying to kick off yet another civil war. Essentially, Tzeentch's manipulation to portray the Monkey King as evil and cause more infighting within Cathay. It's also worth noting that one of the first things G-Dubs did when Cathay was first announced was confirm that an old Hammer Tzeentch cultist named Yan Qing was still canon, a character that was exiled from the kingdom by Sun Wukong, who then attempted an assassination of Karl Franz's son in an attempt to frame Cathay as revenge. All of that to say, the cult of Tzeentch hates the Monkey King big time, and it's clear they have a fierce rivalry going on, which is before we even get into their penchant for treachery, trickery, cunning, and general intrigue. They're kinda two peas in a pod, even if they are on opposite sides of the conflict. I also need to point out that in the current timeline, and according to Andy Hall, the Monkey King is no longer hostile to the Cathay ruling dragons anymore, and in fact has become their somewhat uneasy ally. Li Dao the Fire Dragon still dislikes him quite a bit, and has tried to capture him recently, but there have been numerous incursions from the kings of Ind and the Nagas of Koresh in the south, across the border, and so the dragons have reluctantly had to call for the Monkey King's help and allowed him to remain autonomous in the Mountains of Heaven, which of course is all very amusing for their people. So a lot of you guys have been asking me why I don't believe there's another one of the dragon siblings next on the agenda, and this is really the crux of the issue. Diverse playstyles, not just on the campaign map, but in battle as well, are a core facet of this trilogy and its variety. And in battle, Zhao Ming and Miao Ying play very similarly, as would their brothers and sisters, particularly when it comes to a character like Li Dao, who wields fire spells just like Zhao Ming does. The Monkey King, on top of already having a clear rivalry with Tzeentch, would play nothing like the dragons, and is an iconic character in Chinese mythology with Journey to the West. So he kind of checks all the boxes with what CA wants from a Lord pack. I do believe at least one of Li Dao the Fire Dragon and Yin Yin the Sea Dragon will become playable later down the line, but with the move away from Legendary Lord Free LC, I do think people need to start looking at the lineup mathematically and realize that even if Warhammer 3 gets another 5 years support, which may or may not be slightly generous, there's no possible way every character we want is gonna make it in. And so adding all the dragons from Jade to Fire to Sea seems somewhat unlikely to me. How many times will Cathay even come up in expansions over those 5 years? 3 at the max? But perhaps more likely just twice, given CA's pace and how many other factions also need love. We're not going to see Shen Zhu and Yuan Bo and Yin Yin and Li Dao, especially if Creative Assembly stops doing Legendary Lord Free LC. Probably only see 2 of those characters would be my guess. So what would we expect from the Monkey King's playstyle and start position? If he rides a Nimbus Cloud like he does in Chinese mythology, he's going to be super agile, lightning quick, and hit like a Mack truck, but very squishy. My guess is he'd be heavily focused on speed, disruption, and dueling, able to dodge enemy attacks with high physical resistance and overwhelming attack, probably magical attacks for killing demons, smoke bombs, invisibility, cloning techniques, and misdirection like Alathanar, but would get pounded in a straight-up fight by characters like Torox, Tyrion, or Orzul Skulltaker. His monkey warriors will likely be armed with Shaolin bow staffs. I envision them being a mid-tier infantry unit, fast and lightly armored with bonus versus infantry, offering a more aggressive and glass cannon approach compared to the defensive nature of Jade warriors. Similar role to War Dancers for the Wood Elves, I think, around a 750 to 800 gold price point. And as mentioned, they are the second most populous group in Cathay, so they'd make up the core of his armies. But as the initial roster for Cathay was relatively grounded, I think this is where CA will go more balls to the wall on the mythical side and add stuff like Temple Guardian Lions, foot-sized terracotta automaton infantry, Onyx Crowmen, Qi Lin, that kind of stuff. Most of the Cathayan units added here will be more aggressive, higher mobility, and squishier than the human side of the roster. So you'll have that juxtaposition between the very defensive and artillery range-focused nature of the human side, and then the more aggressive, mythical, monstrous side of Cathay. And of course, I believe he'd start in the south of Cathay, in the Mountains of Heaven, near the borders of Ind. So now let's talk about Tzeentch. The first line I want to discuss is actually about the free character coming in the update, because while Shadows of Change will indeed have its own paid legendary hero, there's another one coming on top of that. And CA dropped a pretty huge hint on who that could be. A frontline fighter twisted by the Lord of Change. This really narrows it down to only two options: Echoed Hellbrass or Galrouch the Great Drake, the first Chaos Dragon. Both are frontline fighters, both are twisted by the Lords of Change, both would be a very worthy addition as a legendary hero in this game. Galrouch was a great golden dragon, present at the Isle of the Dead, the same climactic battle where Anarion the Defender made his legendary last stand against 4 greater demons. Galrouch ripped the head clean off Fate Claw, a powerful Lord of Change, but was in turn corrupted and racked with convulsions as his body was thus possessed. His head was split in two, both becoming living sentient creatures of their own personality and disposition, and ever since that fateful day, the noble spirit of the dragon within rebels against the demon, occasionally wresting control and ripping at the other head. Galrouch would make for a very cool legendary hero, but more realistically, I think the free LC will be Echoed Hellbrass, wielder of the Breath of Life. Everywhere he marches, life springs up around him. Grass, trees, flowers, and entire meadows blossom in his wake, as he has the power to heal those around him. He wields the Windblade Greatsword, which gives him the power to fly and do all sorts of crazy things, and he is the definition of a frontline combatant, clad head to toe in chaos armor, and he isn't really focused on casting spells. The Breath of Life is mostly just a passive thing that follows him around, like some kind of version of a Gyran Unholy Lodestone corpse cart. One of the biggest issues Tzeentch currently faces in their campaign is their lack of replenishment, and Echoed Hellbrass could help a lot on that front, so I think he's going to be the free LC hero. But for the main course, there is sure to be lots of discussion who the legendary lord for Tzeentch will be. Egram von Horseman is a possibility, and I certainly think he'd be a worthy addition at some point. As I've said many times, I really like him, I really like his lore, I love the nod to his origin story in the original Warhammer 1 announcement cinematic, but in my opinion, he has always felt more like a free character to me. He's a Lore of Light caster in Chaos Armor on a Chaos Dragon. None of that is new mechanically, none of that is new when it comes to assets. I think he's a lot like Imric of Calidor, a very interesting character that could bring a lot to the table as a free lord, but I'm not sure he moves the needle as much as the headliner of a $20 plus Lord pack. Not to mention, he's a mortal Chaos Sorcerer, not a demon, and we just got Village, so I think a demon character for Tzeentch is much more likely here. Yes, it is true, I currently believe Tamarkan will be the Nurgle representative in Thrones of Decay, and he is also mortal, albeit a weird little predatory slug thing that wears people's skin, and not an actual human. Point is, he's not a demon, but the reason I think that is purely a function of the matchup itself, and the content that is currently missing from the Empire. As I said, it's entirely possible this will be Epidemius versus Boris, and the Cult of Ulrich, but there's no hard and fast rivalry there, and on the back of the Chaos Dwarfs expansion, a Nurgle vs Empire matchup screams Tamarkan vs Elspeth von Draken. Volnir the Reaper and a few other characters are potentials as well. They could throw a curveball there, but I'm expecting Tamarkan vs Elspeth. When it comes to the other Ruinous Powers and their First Lord packs though, post-Champions of Chaos, I'm expecting Demonic Heralds, because demonic characters are the ones that are missing right now, and that is why I believe the Changeling is the character for Tzeentch. Now, the Changeling has already been hinted at pretty heavily as the main agent that infiltrated Cathay and whispered sweet nothings in the ears of the populace about what a chaotic douche nozzle the Monkey King is, so the groundwork has already been laid out for that rivalry. Everything we know about the Monkey King, not just in terms of Warhammer lore, but his general personality and mythology, is doubly true and amplified when it comes to the Changeling. They are alike in so many ways. Throughout his story arc, legends tell of the pranks the Changeling has played on the other Chaos Gods. He sows conflict and discord wherever he treads, stealing priceless artifacts and framing others, causing wars to break out in the warp and generally causing mayhem and mischief. He made Khorne sit on a nurgling whoopee cushion and locked him out of his own brass citadel. He cut the locks from the Dark Prince's perfect hair. He stole the Apples of Wisdom and forced a war between Nurgle and Slaanesh, and he can take the form of any creature in the universe except Tzeentch himself, which means he can cast an ability on a greater demon, and for a limited time, perfectly replicate its stats and visuals, which means the Changeling could cast a spell on a Terracotta Sentinel or a Lord of Change and become a Terracotta Sentinel or Lord of Change, or a Great Unclean One, which obviously opens up some extremely interesting battlefield tactics. like Deathmaster Snickich, he's not exactly known for his generalship, for being a leader of endless demonic hordes or anything like that, but I don't think that's going to end up mattering too much to CA. The seeds have been planted, he's been hinted at heavily for a long time, he is a perfect thematic rival to the Monkey King, and so he is the character I expect to see when Shadows of Change goes live this summer. In terms of units, it might be a good time to add the Mutalith Vortex Beast, Zongors, and Brimstone Horrors. Brimstone Horrors would work kind of like Tzeentchy little Nurglings, a swarm unit with barrier and flaming magical damage, lower tier even than Blue Horrors. Zangors are of course one of the most requested Tzeentch units, flying beastmen on discs that have made a big impact on Age of Sigmar and 40k in recent years, but never quite functioned like flying disc beastmen in fantasy. I won't pretend to know if Games Workshop will approve their current form in a Warhammer fantasy game or not. It's been kind of hit or miss in the past, but all I know is the idea of Bird Boy Beastmen flying around casting spells and raining magical spears down upon their foes sounds like way too much fun to pass up, so I'd really like to see them. And of course, the Mutalith Vortex Beast is a massive centerpiece monster, transmogrifying enemies and melting blobs, and leadership with its aura of mutation would be super cool as well. It's basically a gigantic chaos spawn with a portal to the warp on its back. Crazy looking unit. And finally, that leaves us with Kislev. I actually really like their campaign in its current form. Two of my favorite playthroughs thus far have both come with Tsarina Katerin, but of course they do have a few issues at the moment, like the supporters race having zero impact on Tsar Boris, which means he kind of feels a bit left in the dust, I guess I could say, at least compared to the other two Kislev lords, and kind of makes sense considering he was a free LC, but I think they need to rejig and rethink a little bit about how his campaign's been implemented, and not getting access to huge swaths of the tech tree for big sections of the campaign is also a big problem for him, because geographically he's not located in an area where he can easily get access to Prague, or Kislev, or Arengrad, and that's really annoying, because it means his tech tree is useless for a lot of the campaign. More importantly though, bear mounts are a big problem, one that I think this overhaul really needs to address. Katerin needs a new mount, straight up, and some more impactful casting options to boot. At the moment, there's very little differentiating her from the generic ice witches of her own faction, and while she's in fairly good shape otherwise, she doesn't really stand out either. A mixed lore of magic with Tempest and Ice, with bigger ones and magic reductions to her top tier spells, would help a lot, I think, and a really fast sled pulled by Majestic Ice Elk or some other unique creature would go a long way in carving out the unique identity she deserves. In the lore, she has a sled. CA have said specifically and explicitly that they planned on doing one for her, they just ran out of time, so when Kislev gets their overhaul, that would be a good time to right that wrong. It doesn't need to be nearly as damaging as the Chariot of the Gods. She's not Cetra, moving around at 105 speed, charging through light infantry, always being where you need to be to get those powerful spell casts off. That's what the Ice Queen is all about. Having a really mobile chariot would be perfectly thematic for her. As for Kastaltin, the Supreme Rasputin could really use some religious nut jobs in his employ. At the moment, he has almost nothing thematic or interesting that ties him to the orthodoxy when it comes to unit choices. It's just him and the Patriarchs, that's it. Nothing like flagellants or war altars or anything that makes them really feel like a crusading religious faction, and that was one of my big gripes for them moving into the release day. They just didn't have a whole lot that tied anything to Kastaltin, and it kind of made him feel like an afterthought. That needs to be rectified. But the main course for Kislev, in keeping with the theme of magical outcasts of mischief and mayhem, is Mother Ostankya, the Boogie Woman. Mother Ostankya will get you. That's what my old babushka would say when we were making too much noise or getting our fingers in the honey jar. For years we thought she was a child's tale to frighten us into behaving. Then one day, in my 20th winter, I got too close to the woods, and when I was told Mother Ostankya would get you, I knew if I took one step closer to the trees, it would be true. She is an Ungol hag mother living in the Dukeless Forest, a protector of the motherland, and a channeler of the magics of the Ancient Widow. We did a full breakdown of her character and what she brings to the table in another video, but as a reminder, she's a purveyor of old and evil and ancient folklore, heavily inspired by Slavic mythology. Essentially, she's a deformed, angry old hag who lives in a hut that she can summon to life, walking on big old chicken legs and stomping anyone and anything who gets in her way. while her crooked hut stands on chicken legs of bronze, forged by the mystic arts, glowing with unearthly light in the haunted forest at the heart of Kislev's birchwood forest. When the time for battle comes, her enchantments bring the hut to life, carrying her into battle, stomping through opposition and tearing them apart as she blasts the enemy with ice and dark magic, which is a rare thing indeed for a human to wield in the Warhammer setting. But then she isn't entirely human, ancient beyond reckoning and imbued with the power of the land itself. She is not an explicitly evil mirror of the Ice Queen's Arena Caterin, but she certainly is a dark mirror of her, taking all the tropes associated with the Ice Court and kinda flipping them on their head. Naturally, she'd be joined by the Hag Witches and Hag Mothers, those Ungol wise women who developed the sight and showed aptitude in summoning the spirits of Kislev. So we'll see Hawks of Mishka, Frost Fiend Ice Spirits, perhaps Rusalka Mermaids who lure their victims to an icy, watery death, Lady Midday, the scythe-wielding demon, Leshy Forest Spirits, Angered Ancestor Domovoy. These are the kind of creatures that appeared in early Kislev supplements and borrow liberally from Slavic folklore. I don't think the entirety of the new Kislev roster here would be mythical. I imagine they'd spatter some rank and file in as well, maybe a new artillery piece, because I think they're a bit lacking on that front. Urigan cannons could be a good one, but as much as people talk about the bear flanderization and such, the Kislev roster we have right now, the one that was launched on day one, is still quite grounded for Warhammer Fantasy. The stuff that's missing that will really sell a DLC aren't Ungol horse archers or dudes in Yashankas. It's going to be stuff we haven't seen yet, and whether people like it or not, a founding principle of Kislev and the Motherland is that it is imbued with magic that quite literally awakens the earth to defend it. This means spirits and ice creatures and the weather itself are a huge part of Kislev and its defense, and that will be reflected here in this DLC, I do believe. So that is the lineup I expect with Shadows of Change coming later this summer. You can see it has a very cohesive theme. Mother Ostankya and the mythological creatures of Kislev, the Changeling and the creatures of Tzeentch, and the Monkey King coming down from the mountains of heaven. Sounds pretty awesome to me. But let me know what you all think, and I'll see you all in the next video. Indie Pride, signing out for now. Have a good one, guys.